All right. Hi, everyone. So for this lecture, I'd like to discuss the research proposal. So let me present to you the slide. All right. So again, since this is a class on qualitative analysis of political data, one of your research classes in political science, it is understood that you have to submit a research paper, a completed research paper by the end of the semester. But as you all know, before you can actually complete a research paper or a research project, uh, it is very important that you have a good research proposal. So that is why I want to discuss uh, the research proposal and how to do it, how to write it properly. So what is a research proposal? I'm sure you guys already have uh, an idea. You are already familiar with what a research proposal is. But hopefully for this session, you'll have a deeper understanding and you have um, a better knowledge of what a research proposal should be. So as you can see in the slide, I will read. It is a document that presents a plan for a project to reviewers for evaluation. So I think that's pretty much straightforward. A research proposal is a plan. Okay, so keep that in mind. Its purpose is to convince reviewers that the researcher is capable of successfully conducting the proposed research project. So I guess the point here as well is you're not doing the research proposal just because it's a requirement or just because you have to do it. There is a particular purpose for the research proposal. And again, that is to tell your reviewer, in this case, me, as your instructor for this semester, you have to convince me why your research is worth doing. Why is it worth conducting, for example? So, so that's what a research proposal is. Furthermore, a proposal describes the research problem and its importance, and it gives a detailed account of the methods that will be used. So notice in these sentences, there are words or parts that are highlighted in yellow. And I think these are important points that you have to remember. So again, a proposal describes the research problem and its importance. So when you do a research, you have to make sure that your research deals with something, a problem that is really interesting. Perhaps something that has not been done before, something that requires further investigation, a question that has not been asked before. So if you have a good question in mind, then you probably can propose it, as a possible research project. The proposal is similar to a research report, but is written before the research project begins. I guess this is, again, self-explanatory, but take note, it is written before the research project begins. You cannot write your research paper without a research proposal. I guess that's the point. Okay, so if you think um, you can wing the entire requirement and just do everything towards the end of the semester, that is entirely not possible because the research proposal has to be approved, and you have to make sure that it is good. Once you have a good research paper, then you can proceed with your project. So these are the parts of the research proposal: the title and abstract, introduction, and background, the statement of the problem, the research objective, significance of the study, review of related literature, framework of the study, your arguments, variables and hypotheses, your methodology is very important. You have to make sure that it is there, how you will do your research. And after methodology, since obviously this is a proposal, you're not yet submitting a complete required research paper. Uh, you have to show your plan in the form of a timetable. So how will you do your proposed research within a particular time frame? And that is within this semester. All right. And of course, you also have to include your reference. And we will discuss each part in detail in the next few slides. All right. So if you think about it, the proposal has most of the parts of a research report, but it lacks results, the discussion of results, and the conclusion section. So as you said before, again, you're not yet you're not yet submitting a completed research paper or a completed thesis. This is a research proposal, and you have to focus more on the plan and how you will do your. All right, so let's start with the title of your proposed research. When doing the title, I I think one of the important things that you have to remember is the simpler the better, or a simple title is best, basically. Uh, Especially today, there's a need for us to make our research more relevant. For example, um, it won't help if you will provide a title that is out of this world or is very complicated. So you have to come up with a title that is interesting, but also clear. Okay, not just interesting, the title has to be clear as well. So let's look at the examples. So first, elite norm internalization, a study on sustainable development and the Nauhan Lake. Second, whose city is it anyway? Multi-scalar power relations in the urbanization of Port Bonifacio. Or it can be as straightforward as this. The third one, the tension point of democratic left politics in Akbayan's alliance with the Aquino administration. Um, what do you notice here? As stated in the slide, I'd like you to also remember that when you're doing uh, your title should already contain the variables involved in your. So, for example, um, let's look at the first title: Elite Norm Internalization, a study on sustainable development. I think in this example, we clearly see variables such as elite norm internalization and then sustainable development, particularly in the Nauhan Lake, which is in Mindoro. So you have to make sure that your variables are there. And by variables, we simply mean uh, the element involved or the elements involved in the research which are being examined. For example, does variable one affect another variable? So if if you're interested in knowing whether or not um, a particular law or a particular norm in the case of the first example has an effect on a particular locality, then probably that is how you should present your title. So elite norm internalization on the one hand, and then sustainable development on the other hand. If you look at the other titles, there are also the variables uh, presented. So for example, multi-scalar power relation. That's one variable, the other one being the urbanization of Fort Bonifacio. So just by looking at this title, you can probably already ask yourself, what is the relationship between multi-scalar power relations and the urbanization of Fort Bonifacio? Okay, so in that way, your title is already saying something from the beginning. Okay, so please remember that. So of course, in the proposal, you should have an abstract. What is an abstract? So I'm sure you have an idea what an abstract is. It is a brief summary of the paper. Okay. Again, since this is not yet a completed paper or research paper, uh, you cannot summarize. You cannot include in your summary the findings and the conclusion. Okay. So that is to follow. But for the proposal, you just have to summarize the proposal itself. So there, consider 4 to 5 sentences summarizing the introduction, objectives, and methods of the study. Okay, so when it comes to the introduction, uh, take note of the following. So it is the part of the paper that provides readers with background information for the research reported. Okay? Its purpose is to establish a framework for the research so readers can understand how it's related to other research. Right? So, but I think for this passage, the highlight is the introduction provides background information. All right. So if you want to introduce your study, you cannot just um, directly discuss findings, for example. You have to somehow help your reader understand why you're doing it, what the topic is about, what is or what are pieces of information that could help your readers understand your topic. So you have to properly introduce your topic. In an introduction, the writer should create reader interest in the topic, lay the broad foundation for the problem that leads to the study, place the study within the larger context of the scholarly literature, and reach out to a specific audience. Okay, so for example, if we go back to the previous slide, so some of the titles, some of the topics involve again elite norm internalization, and sustainable development in a particular locality. Perhaps a good way to introduce that topic is if you discuss um, what is what is what is an international norm, for example, or and how has a particular norm or how have norms in the international arena been discussed? How have norms um, been applied to particular context? How have certain norms, like again, sustainable development, been observed in certain countries or in certain locations or in certain places? So um, by doing this, you are already giving your readers a proper background you're already placing your study within its larger context. Okay? So maybe you can say things like, this topic is or has proven relevant because what are the reasons? Possibly because uh, it has been uh, a common uh, point or topic in casual discussions, but it has not really been studied thoroughly. It can also be that uh, there, you believe or you are arguing that this is a very pressing issue, but it has not really been addressed. So you have to, you can mention such things in the introduction. All right. So make sure that uh, your research proposal is good um, from the start, and that means the introduction. You have to write the introduction well. All right. And then after introduction, after successfully introducing your paper, uh, it is very important that you also state your problem. So there is a statement of the problem. So you said things about your topic. You've given us a good introduction. Now, what is it that you want to really uh, research on, right? So what is the statement of the problem? It is a broad statement indicating the goals of the research project. This section informs readers what aspects of the general picture will be investigated, and it can be stated in the form of questions. It can be a general question, and it can also be um, specific questions, and or. It can be general and or specific questions. Let's look at the examples. First, um, let's look at the third one. This is related to the title on elite norm internalization. Why have some domestic elites internalized the norm of sustainable development, while others have not? Okay, so I think this uh, research question or this statement of the problem is a good example, again, because it is clear and it asks a question that really wants to address a particular concern. Notice also, again, that just like in the title, the variables involved are also uh, clearly seen in your statement of the problem. So I'd also like everyone to remember that the statement of the problem should include, should clearly include the variables involved in your research. Okay? Let's look at the other example. The second one, how does the Philippine state balance its power and authority in its partnership with non-state actors in developing state land, particularly Fort Bonifacio? Again, another example. Why? Because it clearly um, states the question, and it also includes the variables involved. And the variables involved are, again, uh, power relations, worded here as, again, um, how the Philippine state balances power and authority in partnership with non-state actors. And then the other variable is worded as developing state land, particularly Fort Bonifacio. Or if you think about it, simply referring to development. If you want to simplify the question, how would you do it? This question is actually asking what is the effect or what is the impact of power relations on development. Okay, so power relations on the one hand, and then development. I think that's a very good example. Let's look at the first example. Why is Akbayan's participation in the Aquino administration a continuing tension point, not only between and among its leaders and members, but also between the party and its allied social movement? Okay, so again, another good example. Um, the variables are there, and those are Akbayan participation in the Aquino administration, and the other variable is what is it being related to? It is the variable of what's the variable? Um, Extension, correct? So just by looking at this question alone, you could already sense that the author or the writer, the researcher wants to know, the relationship between a particular organization's involvement in an administration. So in this case, it's Akbayan partnership with the Aquino administration, and uh, the tension point that ensues because of that participation, or because of that alliance or involvement. So I think that is again a good example, a good way to think about a particular political problem, political issue. Another thing that I'd like you to remember is for our class, since we are trying to pursue a political scientific research, we are political science, remember. Um, I think we should go beyond questions like what is or what who is or does this thing do this or what is this thing. Um, let's go beyond those kinds of questions. I think um, a good political science research actually addresses questions that start with why or how. All right? Because if you ask questions um, that deal with a why or a how, I think that's really when you are being a political science scholar or a political scientist. You're really um, you're really after revealing processes. You're really interested in explaining how a particular event happens or why a particular event happens. So that is my challenge to everyone. Let your statement of the problem be a why statement or a how statement. Your research question should be a why or a how question. Okay? And then of course you have to include objectives in your research proposal. So what are objectives? So this part refers to a clear statement of the specific purposes of the study, which identifies the key study variables and their possible interrelationships, as well as the nature of the population of interest. In other words, uh, you should answer the question, what exactly do you want to study? That is how you will write the objective. What do you want to study? Right? So try to incorporate a sentence that begins with the purpose or the objective of the study is yada yada yada. Or this paper aims to, or this study seeks to do the following. Okay? So this will clarify your own mind as to the purpose and it will inform the reader directly and explicitly. So it has to be clear. Your objective should be clear. Let's let's look at examples. So When writing the objective, you should write first a general objective that is a requirement and specific objective. So you have a general objective, and then under this general objective, there may be specific objectives. Let's look at the first example. So the general objective of the study is to identify selected demographic factors related to religiosity using the SWS National Survey on Religion. The specific objectives are to test the association between three demographic factors: gender, family, income, subjective social class, and self-rated religiosity of a sample of adult Filipinos. So what do you notice? The specific objectives are actually um, detailed expressions of the general objective. So um, do not be confused about your objectives. It is important that the general objectives and the specific objectives are clearly and directly related. So you cannot say something in the general objective and then say something else that's totally not that's totally not related or relevant to the general objective. Let's look at the other example. This is actually the objectives of um, my thesis or my MA. So we mainly look into power relations and subjectivity as they are portrayed in and demonstrated by Cinemalaya independent films. In order to more profoundly make sense of this, we specifically aim to first assess the selected Cinemalaya entries from 2010 to 2014, particularly vis-a-vis the socio-political milieu in which they were produced and screened. Second, investigate how the selected films address power relations and subjectivity as seen in how they were created and produced by their filmmakers. Third, yada yada yada. Fourth, yada yada. What do you notice? Uh, Again, the objectives are clear. They have to be clear. They cannot be vague statements on what you want to do. Okay? So, for example, you probably want to investigate. So you say something like, this study hopes to investigate the relationship um, between the anti-terrorism law and freedom of expression. Okay, that's a good general objective. And then you say in the specific objective things like to do this, we specifically want to know about um, you want to know about the opinion of certain groups. You cannot say general or unclear statements like that. So you have to be very clear. Who do you want to um, who do you want to study or what do you want to study? So you have to be very specific. Your research proposal should also have and explain the significance of the study. Okay, what is the significance of the study? A brief statement on the importance or relevance of the proposed study. In this part, you have to be able to answer or discuss the following points. First, how will the study add to our general knowledge? So if you're able to say that your research paper actually helps us have more knowledge or have a different kind of understanding on a particular political issue, then that's probably one way to say that your study is significant. Okay, another question you should discuss. Uh, what importance will it be? to research users? Or how will your research be important? How can it be used? Okay? Another question you have to discuss or answer or to prove that your study is significant. How will it settle issues in the academic literature? So probably uh, once you review the literature, you found out that your study has not really been um, taken or it has not really been answered by anyone. And that's another way to say that this is exactly why, or this is why we want to do our study because um, it still needs further investigation. Simple. So let's look at the examples. So much of what we know about the link between social deprivation is from Western studies and small-scale survey research. This study seeks to test propositions in a non-Western, specifically Philippine setting and using national survey data. Okay. How will it be useful? The findings can have implications for the church in determining groups that need to be attracted to its fold. So there is also some sort of a practical um, importance or use. So as you can see in this example, the writer was able to say the study is significant because we are applying um, the we are applying existing assumptions or existing findings on non-Western settings, particularly the Philippines. Okay, um, this is very important. Your research proposal should have a good review of related literature. Please remember that. Your review of related literature should be solid. Okay? The review of related literature provides the background and context for the research problem. It should establish the need for the research and indicate that the writer is knowledgeable about the area. A critical summary of research on a topic of interest generally prepared to put a research problem in context or to identify gaps and weaknesses in prior studies so as to justify an investigation. So notice the parts highlighted again. Um, why are you reviewing the literature? So ask yourself again, should you why should you do this? Why does why does my research have a review of related literature? Because again, it is one way to show that you know about your topic. So that's why you want to discuss what has been done. Um, what are the different studies and what have these different studies stated or said about the topic. So that again, that's a review of the related literature. What is the current literature? What has the literature so far said about my topic? But I think ultimately, the review of related literature is actually um, it's actually a way to justify your study by identifying gaps and weaknesses. So that is the purpose of the research of the review of related literature. You do the review of related literature because you want or because you think there is a gap in our understanding. So again, maybe your research has been done in different contexts, probably in more Western countries, mostly in Western countries, but not really in the Philippines, not in the Philippines at the local level. So maybe you want to highlight uh, by reviewing or in by so after reviewing your related literature, you can simply point out that your study will address gaps because you want to apply it to your local context. That's one example, and that's one way to justify your research. That's one way to do your to explain your review of related books. Okay? So that is a review of related literature. Later on, you will see that this is actually um, very much related to the framework because before you can normally before you do the framework, before you identify the applicable concepts or theories that will explain your problem, um, you have to uh, look for existing frameworks in the literature. Okay, so basically, the idea is based on the literature, you can now create your framework. Okay, so you can probably get an idea from a particular author about a particular concept, and you want to apply that to your study. So you will extract, you will pull that certain idea and then apply it to your framework because you think that it's going to help your explanation. All right. But going back to the review related literature, avoid statements that imply that little has been done in the area or that what has been done is too extensive to permit easy summary. Statements of this sort are usually taken as indications that the writer is not really familiar with the literature. So um, it's not always just applying a particular concept to a particular area or particular context. So aside from that, why else are you doing your study based on the review of related literature? So maybe aside from saying that not there's a dearth in studies in the Philippine context or in the Philippine setting, aside from saying that, you also want to relate certain concepts. You want to make sense of your topic, not just from a practical sense or perspective, but also from a theoretical perspective. In the way you actually want to explain political phenomena. So maybe you want to say that so um, the current literature states that this certain issue can be understood in this particular way, but the literature has not really looked at the significance of a particular approach or a particular understanding, and that's what you want to highlight in your study. All right, so that's another way to do the review related literature, and to say that again, that is what I'm going to contribute to what we know about the topic. All right. So there's no limit to the number of references, but a minimum should be about 10 studies. So this can be in the form of books, journal articles, or other scholarly materials. It can be online. So remember, a good review of related literature actually um, explains again or what is the current status um, of your topic or of, um, of studies on your topic. So it's not just as you probably did in high school. It's not just a simple list of books and journal articles and you summarize them. It's not just that. You have to make sense of again what has been done in my or in the topic that I'm interested in. Okay? So normally a good related review of related literature is written in such a way that an author is telling a story. So you have to tell the story of what has been done, what are the major works regarding your topic, and then what are the gaps. So again, it has to be an interesting discussion, and it has to be a seamless discussion of the current status of the literature. All right? So remember that it's a story. That's what I always tell students. The review of related literature should tell an interesting story. Okay? Let's now talk about the framework of the study. So what is the framework of the study? The framework provides an explanation that connects and makes sense of the study's main concept. So um, there can be different, or there can be uh, a number of subsections under the framework of the study. First, there can be the conceptual or theoretical framework. And what is that? It states out the theory in abstract terms using conceptual definition. So when you say conceptual or theoretical framework, this is the part where you discuss the particular theory that you want to apply to your study to explain your argument and to address your question. So if you want to use, for example, the theory of um, political theorists or philosophers like Karl Marx or Michel Foucault, for example, you have to really discuss their theory and explain why they are applicable to your research. Okay? Aside from that, there can also be an analytical or operational framework. And what is that? It applies the theory in concrete terms using the operationalized definitions of the concept. So, um, for your research in this class, you will be required to do uh, to explain both the theoretical framework and then the analytical framework. So in the analytical framework, you're basically applying the theoretical framework, but as as explained within your particular study. So you will apply the theory to your study. Okay. So how does, for example, um, Marxist theory of international relations help us understand the ongoing protest or ongoing anti-government protest in different countries around the world. And if that's what you're interested in, so maybe um, uh, you will be able, that's how you want to do your theoretical and analytical framework. It is also very important that you present a diagram relating the concept and describe it in text form. So let's look at the next slide. So again, this is very important. When I look at your framework of the study, I should be able to see a diagram. So if it has no diagram, it is not a good framework. So remember that. Present a diagram relating the concept and describe it in text form. So in this example, um, it shows the different concepts like elite politics, weak political institutions, and then both concepts point towards another concept, and that is populism. So by just looking at this diagram, you can already have a general idea of what the study is about. Probably the writer is interested in knowing the influence of elite politics and weak political institutions um, on populism. So probably this is an argument saying that elite politics and weak political institutions combined lead to populism. Okay? But it's not enough that there's just a diagram. You have to explain the diagram. So what do these concepts mean? What is elite politics? What is populism? And so you have to be able to explain that once you have or after the diagram. Once you have the diagram. Another example. So I think this is very detailed uh, compared to what we had in the previous slide. So if you look at this framework, it shows an integration of two different theories on social movement. So one is the framework by Goldstone Desai, and then another, the framework proposed by Nathan Kimpo, or the framework of contested democracy. So the author here is trying to combine theories to explain how, again, Akbayan's participation in the Aquino administration actually actually leads to the tension or the political tensions that we saw, you know, during the Said administration. So it is a very colorful, it is a very detailed and intricate framework. And there should be a reason for every color, every arrow, every shape, and every concept stated in your framework. Again, you have to explain that in your framework. Another example, this is the framework for the study on elite norm internalization and sustainable development in the Nauhan Lake. So you see there, the author is trying to make sense of how an international norm can be adopted, used, and internalized by elite actors in a particular local setting. And that is, again, the Nauhan Lake. Okay? So in your framework of the study, um, I I am expecting interesting illustration, but you have to make sure that your illustration is the right way to show how your study should be understood, or how how you want to explain, your argument. At the same time, it cannot be as simple as um, it cannot be as simple as just one concept and then it leads to another concept. Um, you have to be able to clearly present again how things happen, um, how laws apply, or how laws affect communities, for example, or how communities adapt to particular contexts. So your framework should be able to show that. And once you're done with the framework, you can now um, write the methodology. So this is also a major part of your research proposal. Actually, the methodology is, as this passage in the slide mentions, the heart of the research proposal. The activities should be described with as much detail as possible, and the continuity between them should be apparent. So the methodology is the part where we actually explain how you will conduct your research. This is your opportunity to show your reviewers that really my study is feasible and my study is actually based on sensible methods. There is there are specific methods involved. And it is systematic in that sense. Right? So you have to be able to clearly present your methodology to say and to show your viewers that um, you are really going to conduct your research to be able to address your problem. Okay? Alright. The methods or procedures section is really the hard. Alright. The section has several subsections. First, you have the design of the research. What kind of research are you going to conduct? Second, you have your sampling or the sample selection. And when you say sampling, your concern is who are you going to study, or what are you going to study? What's the unit of analysis, for example? And then there's data collection. How will you gather your data? Is it through interviews or other methods? Remember, there's a difference between the concept or the term methodology and method. When you say methodology, it's actually the how you will conduct. But when you say method, it's um, what is that uh, particular um, approach, or what are you going to do? What is that specific um, what is that specific manner in which you will gather or collect data? That is the method. For example, a method or an interview is a method, but the methodology is this entire thing that involves again design, samples, and so on and so forth. After data collection, you have to mention your instruments, your data gathering procedures. So you have your interview. Okay, you said that that's your method or your data collection procedure. But how will you interview? What are your interview questions? For example, who are you going to interview? What are the important considerations involved when doing an interview? And then after that, you have to explain in your methodology how you will process or and analyze your data. So it's not enough that you have the data. Uh, you should also be able to analyze. You have to say how you will analyze your data. Let's talk about them one by one. So design. This refers to the overall strategy of the study. So you have to state the purpose of the research. Is it exploratory? Is it descriptive? Is it explanatory? Or is it a combination of when you say exploratory, you're not really um, trying to prove relationships, but you want to explore, you want to navigate whether there is a relationship between certain variables. A descriptive research talks about whether or not variables have a correlationship. So is one variable correlated to another? An explanatory research is um, a research that explains causality. So in that sense, an explanatory research is boldly um, proving or showing that one variable leads or causes another variable. So one variable leads to another variable. So there's called causality when you're saying your research is explanatory. But I think uh, for this for this requirement, I'm expecting that most of the studies are exploratory. Maybe some can also be descriptive if you want again to do um, or to show the correlation between certain variables. In the design, you also have to state the approach. How will you approach your study? Are you going to do ethnography, discourse analysis? If it's a case study, you have to know what you want to do, and you have to know what your topic demands. So based on your research problem, you should decide on what approach should be done for your study. Finally, you have to state the unit of analysis. So again, you have to be clear about who you will uh, study. Uh, are you going to focus on certain groups or individuals, or are you going to just discuss a particular community? So you have to be clear about the unit of analysis. The unit of analysis is actually um, the object of the study. Who or what will you study? If this is a study on the political significance of film, for example, uh, what are the films that you want to analyze? So if this is a study on um, the foreign policy of the Philippine government towards China, uh, what is it that you're going to analyze? Is it state behavior, or is it also individual, the domestic politics? So you have to be clear about that. Take the unit of analysis, location, secondary analysis, processes. You have to mention the sampling or the manner of selecting respondents. So who will be studied? How will they be selected? This is important even in qualitative research. So there are a lot of people that you can possibly talk to, but who are the best people that you should talk to? Who are the best resource persons? Who are the best uh, respondents or informants that would help you um, substantiate, for example, your claims or your findings? The key reason for being concerned with sampling is that of validity, the extent to which the interpretations of the results of the study follow from the study itself, and the extent to which results may be generalized to other situations with other people. So there's actually a rationale behind the sampling. So you don't just interview anyone. You have to really know who to talk to, who to interview. If you want to talk about um, the issue of gender equality, really talk to someone who doesn't know anything about gender, for example. So you have to know, you have to be sure about your respondent. Probably you want to talk about, or you want to talk to experts on gender politics. You want to talk to um, groups that are gender oriented, not just any group. So you want to make sure that the things or the data, the information included or contained within your study actually are valid for your topic. Okay? Data collection is also part of the methodology, and with this part, you have to outline the general plan for collecting the data. Okay? This may include interviews, focus group discussion, or observation procedures, etc. Describe your research instrument. What is your interview schedule? Then append a copy of this schedule. And then after that, you have to explain how you will analyze data. Describe your data processing plan. Specify the procedures you will use. So you want to do interviews. Okay, so once you have the interview, once you have the transcript, or you have the responses from your interviews, what are you going to do now? How will you use the data to answer your problem or your research question? Maybe you want to um, do conventional content analysis. So you will look through the interview and probably look for patterns in the way people discuss issues or the specific questions in your interview. You also probably want to identify common themes, maybe um, several experts or several interviewees, several respondents, several people within a particular community you interviewed are saying or are sharing things or ideas in common. So you want to probably highlight that in your research. Okay, so since they are talking about, for example, the inefficiency of uh, the government when it comes to providing social services, um, you want to highlight that in your research. So there seems to be again an efficiency issue in the delivery of basic services in a particular local government, for example. So you have to again explain how you will analyze your data. And then in the research proposal, um, after methodology, it's important that you present a clear timetable, how you will actually conduct your research. So this is a sort of schedule, okay, for how you wish to proceed. Because this also has to be reviewed by your reviewer, your advisor, um, and this has to be evaluated on whether or not it's feasible, or if it's possible given the time frame, given the resources involved, or are there things that can be added, for example. So you have to schedule your activities, start from the time you spend preparing the proposal, and end with when you submit the report. Right? As you can see in the column under phases. Work within the period given during the semester and be specific. So if you look at the activity per phase, you have to mention there the specific activities or things that you plan to do. So for data collection, for example, you want to interview certain respondents. You have to also specify who will you interview. Interview the head of the police if you want to talk about how security is in a particular area. Aside from interview respondents, you probably also want to um, say that you will note specific observations. And you have to be specific. What are the specific um, observations that you would like to take note of? Probably the dynamics within or the relationship between law enforcers and the citizens in a particular location. Maybe you want to take note of that, okay? And so on and so forth. Right? So you have to be very clear and specific. In terms of report writing, you also have to include that in your timetable. Normally, the chapters after methodology, or basically the chapters after the proposal, are organized according to the objective. So you have objective one, that is the focus of your chapter. Objective two, that's the focus of your other chapter. That's one way to do it. Others do it in just one big chapter all of the findings, for example. So results and findings are all discussed in one big chapter, and then there's the summary and conclusion. So that's also possible. But uh, I think this is just a matter of preference that for the report writing, you organize your chapter according to the objective, okay? To the specific objective. We also have to include the duration, so the working duration for each phase. How long is data collection going to take? For example, probably 3 weeks, 4 weeks. So know your time frame and then come up with a plan. All right. And before we forget, of course, it's important that you present your references. Be sure to have important materials. Okay. Make sure your research is also up to date. So don't forget about the reference. For this class and for this requirement, I am requiring everyone to follow the Chicago Manual of Style. If you're not yet familiar, it is time for you to start knowing how to do the Chicago Manual of Style. The link is already provided. And then, if you have any important attachments, you have to include that in your appendices. Okay? So at the end of the proposal, attach the instruments and other materials that you will use for your research. Things like your interview or FGD question, your request letter, your consent form, okay? Your transcript, probably, or other raw data, raw documents like a photocopy of an important ordinance or an important policy, for example. So you have to include, you have to attach those under appendix. All right. Before we end, I'd like to give a few reminders. So there will be a template for your research. So a PLMON template will be provided to strictly follow the format in the template. So the format is already there in the template. It should be A4 size, um, Times New Roman, and size 12. Next, do not plagiarize. This is a mortal sin in the academy. Okay? Plagiarism, whether intended or accidental, is unforgivable and unacceptable. Remember, plagiarized papers automatically get a failing mark and will be reported to the college dean. So you'll be dealt with accordingly. So do not take this requirement lightly. Please make the effort. Uh, find the time to really write your research paper and and come up with a research proposal that's acceptable. All right. So that points me to this statement, which is you have to make sure that you write your own research paper. That's basically how you get rid of plagiarism. That's how you avoid plagiarism. You have to write on your own. You have to have the confidence, you know, to write your own paper. That's the secret to avoiding plagiarism. So if you're conscious about your grammar, if you're worried you might not be able to express yourself well in English, it's okay as long as you write your own paper and you try to express the best way possible your ideas. You have to write your own paper. And before submitting your research paper, please edit. Okay? Make sure that you edit, and edit. Alright. So help me also understand your paper. So for you to have, I think, an easier um, an easier semester, or for you to make things easier, uh, please edit your work. So I think this is also a way for us to really um, cooperate. So you help yourself by helping me, so that I can also help you. All right. Because if I don't understand anything in your proposal, then we'll all have a hard time. You'll have a hard time proceeding with the project or proceeding with the requirements. Okay. So again, do your best to come up and write a good research proposal. All right. So Um, that's it for our lecture on the research proposal. Hopefully, you were able to get new insights and new techniques and approaches and strategies on how to write the research proposal. Thank you.